The Arizona sun was sinking low, turning the truck stop into a sheet of glowing brass. Heat still shimmered off the asphalt, and diesel engines idled like distant thunder. A row of motorcycles sat near a vending machine and a scarred picnic table, black and silent, like animals that only moved when they decided to. 3 patched men stood there, leather cracked from miles, eyes sharp, bodies loose but ready. They looked like trouble to anyone passing by. That was why the little girl chose them. She crossed the open pavement slowly, clutching a stuffed rabbit so tight its ear folded over. She did not run. She walked the way kids walk when they have learned that noise brings pain. One of the bikers noticed the way her shoulders were pulled up, the way her eyes kept flicking back toward a clean white SUV rolling to a stop nearby. The danger was not the truck stop. It was the woman stepping out of that SUV, hair perfect, smile sweet, eyes empty. Verna Crowley reached for the child like she was reclaiming property. The girl flinched before she spoke. Her whisper hit harder than any shout. "Please make her stop hurting me." A hand clamped around the girl's wrist, tight. Practiced. One biker started forward, but the leader lifted his hand, stopping him cold. The SUV pulled away with the child inside. The camera stayed on the license plate, carefully written into a grease-stained notebook. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If you like this story, hit subscribe. Cade Graves. Rourke carried himself like a man who had already outlived his worst days and wasn't interested in creating new ones. He stood a little apart from noise, from ego, from the need to be seen. His stare was calm and flat, the kind that didn't challenge but didn't blink either. Loud men tended to quiet down around him without knowing why. He moved with the certainty of someone who had buried friends, made hard calls, and learned that chaos was easy, but control took discipline. Nothing about Graves read as gentle, but nothing about him was reckless. What people felt around him was control earned, measured, absolute. Around town, his name traveled faster than his bike. Folks said he could end a war with a look, that he didn't raise his voice because he never needed to. The truth was less mythical and more dangerous. Graves understood systems. He knew how streets worked, how paperwork worked, how courts worked, and how public perception could be bent or broken. He treated law, reputation, and time like tools in a role, choosing the right one for the job instead of swinging blindly. That was why his crew trusted him when he said, "Wait," even when their blood said, "Move." Roxy, Switchblade. Navarro operated in shadows so clean they looked like normal life. She could stand in a school parking lot or a county office lobby and look like she belonged there, blending into crowds with a notebook and a patient smile. She didn't chase rumors. She collected facts, license plates, addresses, timelines, old complaints that never stuck. Switchblade hunted the way smart predators did, following patterns instead of footprints, building quiet cases that collapsed lies without warning. Jet Sparks. Malloy was the opposite energy, young and wired tight. His temper lived close to the surface, fists always one bad sentence away. Sparks wanted problems solved now, loud and final. But he also worked part-time at Mendoza's garage, which meant he heard everything. People talked when their cars were open and their guards were down. Sparks became the club's ear to the ground, catching whispers before they hardened into stories. Graves relied on him, even while reining him in. Mara Chen brought a different kind of steel. As a family law attorney, she had seen how monsters wore suits and smiles in court. She knew how polished abusers turned truth into doubt and doubt into delay. Mara took what the bikers gathered and forged it into legal weight that judges couldn't ignore. She didn't flinch at intimidation, and she never underestimated how cruel custody battles could become. Dr. Luis Mendoza, steady and methodical, provided something even harder to dismiss than witnesses' documentation. He didn't speculate or dramatize. He recorded trauma responses, behavioral patterns, and clinical indicators with precision that survived hostile questioning. In his notes, pain became undeniable fact. Detective Tomas Ruiz represented gravity. He wasn't corrupt or cruel. He was procedure. When allegations landed on his desk, he had to follow them, even when he smelled manipulation. His presence meant the system was moving, slow and heavy, and once it moved, nobody controlled it completely. Patty Givens, a CPS worker worn thin by years of bad outcomes, carried a rare softness that didn't dull her judgment. She listened carefully, watched closely, and trusted consistency over charm. Her loyalty was always to the child's reality, not the adult's performance. At the school, Ms. Lin Chen had noticed Junie fading. Not acting out, not screaming, disappearing. Quiet withdrawal. Stiff smiles. Answers that sounded practiced. She saw the signs but had been trapped by the same wall. Everyone hit, no proof, only patterns. Old Milo Vargas, holding court at the garage, embodied that wall. He spoke warmly of Verna Crowley, calling her a saint, a good woman, the kind who brought casseroles and volunteered. His voice echoed the neighborhood's belief, the shield that kept suspicion away. Nina from Mesquite Lane carried guilt like a weight. She had seen enough to fear the truth, rough grabs, late-night crying, but she believed nobody would listen. Until Sparks did. At the center of all of it was Junie Rabbit Hale. Small, exhausted, and braver than anyone should have to be. Her courage wasn't dramatic. It was repetition, telling the truth again after being punished for it. Holding on to reality when someone kept trying to rewrite it. And looming over everything was Verna St. Crowley. Polished, admired. Weaponized kindness wrapped around private cruelty. Her violence hid behind charity smiles and curated words. Her real weapon was doubt, making the world question the child before the child ever finished speaking. All of this unfolded across the Arizona outskirts. Truck stops humming with engines, sun-bleached roads stretching nowhere, trailer parks pressed against tidy cul-de-sacs where curtains hid secrets. The air always felt tight, like something waiting to snap. Motorcycle engines rolled through it like distant thunder, while courthouse halls felt colder than any street fight. The Brotherhood's code lived in what they didn't do. They didn't kick doors. They didn't posture. They stayed. They watched. They planned. To them, Brotherhood meant bearing witness and refusing to let a child stand alone, even when walking away would have been easier. Graves watched the SUV roll away until its taillights melted into the dusk, and the urge to chase it hit the men like a gust of hot wind. Sparks took one step forward, then another, jaw locked, fists tightening like he could drag the whole world back by force. Switchblade's eyes had already gone narrow, tracking details the way hunters did. Plate, bumper sticker, a faint dent on the rear panel, the angle of the woman's hand clamped on the child's wrist. Graves didn't move. That was the choice that lit the fuse. He raised one hand, calm, commanding, final, and Sparks froze like he'd hit a wall. Not because Sparks wasn't brave, but because in that moment, Graves wasn't asking. He was saving them from becoming the headline Verna needed. If 3 patched bikers chased a mother and child through a truck stop, the world would never ask what the girl whispered. It would only see leather, ink, and menace. Verna would walk into a police station smiling, and the child would be dragged back home by the same system everyone trusted. Plate, Graves said, voice low. Switchblade was already writing it down in a grease-stained notebook, the numbers and letters pressed into paper like a vow. Sparks swore under his breath, pacing like a caged animal, but Graves snapped his attention back with a hard look. "Cool off," Graves told him. "Not because she deserves mercy. Because that kid deserves a win." The moment Junie had spoken up, the bikers stopped being strangers at a truck stop. They became witnesses. And witnesses were threats to people like Verna Crowley. A woman like that didn't fear fists the way she feared truth. Fists made noise. Truth made patterns. Truth cracked masks. Graves recognized the pattern the instant Junie stepped into their space. He had seen it before, different faces, same script. A controlled child with careful silence. A polished adult with rehearsed warmth. Community praise that made everyone reluctant to believe the worst. Fear that lived in the kid's shoulders like a permanent bruise. Junie didn't act like a child who was simply scared. She acted like a child who had been trained to survive fear quietly. They could have ridden out. They could have told themselves it wasn't their business. That the world had agencies and hotlines and rules for this kind of thing. But Graves also knew what those rules looked like when the wrong person learned how to use them. He'd seen kids swallowed by procedure while predators smiled and waited. He'd seen the word accident used like a mop to clean up a crime scene. So he set them in motion like a machine. Switchblade went first. She didn't storm anywhere. She simply followed a trail the way she always did, starting with the plate. Within hours, she had a name. Verna Crowley, and the address tied to her vehicle. A tidy neighborhood on the outskirts, the kind with trimmed lawns and cheerful porch lights. The kind of place where neighbors waved and believed what they wanted to believe. Sparks went where talk lived. He clocked in at Mendoza's garage the next morning, wiping his hands on a rag, listening more than he spoke. Men came in with overheated engines and loose belts and loose tongues. Women came in with coffee and gossip. Every conversation was a window. Sparks asked the right questions without sounding like he was asking anything at all. Crowley? Old Milo Vargas repeated when Sparks slipped the name into casual talk. Milo's face brightened, like the name brought sunshine. That woman's a saint. Volunteers, church drives, the whole deal. Shame about the kid being difficult. Sparks felt the heat rise in him, but he swallowed it. Graves had drilled it into him. Anger was fuel, but it could also be fire that burned the wrong house down. Sparks kept his voice neutral, like he was just curious. Meanwhile, Graves began the quiet watch. No stalking theatrics, no obvious intimidation. Just presence at the edges. He cruised past the neighborhood at a distance, noting cameras on houses, traffic flow, where kids played, where people didn't. He watched school drop-offs from far enough away to be invisible, close enough to catch patterns. He wasn't hunting Verna with violence. He was hunting truth. The emotional stakes were carved into him from the moment Junie whispered. She hadn't asked them to hurt anyone. She'd asked them to make it stop. And beneath that request was something even more desperate, a need to be believed. Kids like Junie learned quickly that truth got punished and silence got rewarded. Her fear was trained. Her softness was survival. The stuffed rabbit wasn't a toy. It was a life raft. The physical stakes were worse. If Verna sensed exposure, she wouldn't simply get angry. She would adapt. She could vanish. She could escalate. She could tighten her grip until the child's world became smaller than a closet. Or she could do what she did best. Flip the narrative. Tell authorities that dangerous bikers were stalking her, that her husband was unstable, that the child was troubled and lying. A woman like Verna didn't fight with fists in public. She fought with stories. And stories, once they were stamped into reports, were hard to erase. That was the battlefield, not just a house, not just a child. A whole ecosystem that protected predators if they learned how to look harmless. Graves saw the first hard edge of it when Switchblade spoke to Ms. Maz, Lin Chen of the school. The teacher's eyes carried worry, but her words carried frustration. She had noticed Junie fading socially quiet withdrawal, stiff smiles, answers that sounded rehearsed. She had logged concerns, tried gentle questions, watched the child shrink in real time. But she had no concrete proof. And without proof, systems became walls. CPS had rules and thresholds. They couldn't move on a feeling, no matter how sharp that feeling was. They required patterns, documentation, consistency, something that held up when a polished adult smiled in an office and said, "She's confused." The neighborhood was worse. The neighborhood was blind by choice. In their minds, Verna was a saint. She brought food to sick neighbors. She laughed politely at block parties. She knew the right things to say. People wanted to believe the best version of her because it made the world feel safe, and Junie's father, Dane Hale, was the final locked door. He traveled for work, long stretches gone. Not evil, not cruel, just absent. Absence could be a weapon in the wrong hands. When you weren't there, you didn't see the flinch. You didn't hear the tone behind the smile. You didn't notice the lock on the child's door from the outside. Then Switchblade dug deeper, and the story widened into something darker. Verna had a history. Not rumors, patterns. Old marriages that ended with strange exits. A past child death, labeled an accident, filed away so clean it looked like nothing happened at all. A husband's fatal wreck that locals still spoke about in lowered voices, not because they had proof, but because something about it didn't sit right. And in every corner of it, Verna's name stayed polished, untouched, protected by the same shield of, "She's such a good woman." Switchblade laid the findings out on a table with Graves and Sparks, each detail like a nail driven in slow. A timeline, names, locations, a chain of accidents and misunderstandings that only looked random if you refused to connect the dots. Sparks wanted to tear the whole house apart right then. Graves didn't let him. Graves stared at the page like it was a map of a minefield, because that was exactly what it was. If they stepped wrong, they didn't just lose the fight. They lost Junie. That night, long after the truck stop had gone quiet in their minds, Graves sat alone with the notebook open. The plate number stared back at him, and behind it, Junie's voice stayed lodged in his skull like a splinter he couldn't pull out. Please make her stop hurting me. He understood then, with cold clarity, why walking away wasn't possible. Because forgetting wasn't neutral. Forgetting was a decision. Forgetting was what let predators keep living normal lives while kids learned how to disappear. So Graves made the promise that would carry them through the worst of it. They would build a case so strong the system couldn't blink, and they would keep Junie alive long enough to see it. The days that followed tightened like a noose, drawn slow. Graves and Switchblade moved through Verna Crowley's world without ever stepping into it, mapping her routine the way soldiers mapped hostile ground. School drop-offs happened at the same time every morning, Verna stepping out of her SUV with practiced warmth, hand light on Junie's shoulder when eyes were watching, fingers tightening only when she thought they weren't. Neighborhood walks followed predictable loops. Charity events filled her calendar, each one another coat of polish layered onto her reputation. Graves watched her smile at strangers, touch arms gently, bow her head at the right moments. It was flawless. It was rehearsed. And it was armor. What didn't match was Junie. Every day her signals sharpened. The flinch came quicker now, shoulders lifting when adults spoke too suddenly. She scanned faces before answering questions, eyes darting for permission that shouldn't have been needed. Her posture stayed stiff, like she was braced for impact even while standing still. Graves saw it from a distance and felt something old and heavy settle in his chest. Fear lived in her body, not her words. Sparks made his move carefully. He didn't knock on doors with accusations or wear his colors where they could intimidate. He caught Nina from Mesquite Lane, the way people always caught each other in small neighborhoods, by chance near mailboxes and driveways. He talked about engines, about heat, about nothing that mattered. Then he let Verna's name slip into the air like an afterthought. Nina froze. It took time. Sparks didn't push. He let silence do the work. Finally, the words came out of her in pieces, like she was afraid even speaking them might bring consequences. She'd seen Verna yank Junie hard enough to make the child cry out. She'd seen Junie pulled away from other kids, kept inside when everyone else played. She'd heard muffled crying through walls late at night and told herself it was none of her business. She never reported it because she already knew how it would go. A smiling woman. A troubled child. No proof. She believed nobody would listen. Sparks listened. When he brought it back to Graves, there was no celebration, no sense of victory. Just another weight added to the load. Graves laid it out clean and simple. Nina would give a statement when she was ready. No pressure. No threats. No intimidation. They would collect truth the right way or not at all. Their strength wasn't muscle. It was patience. Graves understood something Sparks didn't yet. People like Verna didn't lose because someone punched them. They lost because their story collapsed under the weight of facts they couldn't charm away. He took a risk next, one that had nothing to do with force. Graves left Junie a message she could safely find, placed where it wouldn't alert Verna and wouldn't escalate danger. It was simple. No promises he couldn't keep. No dramatic words. Just enough to tell her she hadn't imagined the truck stop, that someone believed her, that help was moving even if she couldn't see it yet. The message wasn't rescue. It was oxygen. At school, Ms. Lin Chen felt a shift she couldn't explain at first. Junie didn't suddenly become cheerful or relaxed, but something changed in her eyes. The teacher doubled down on documentation, logging attendance patterns, social withdrawal, posture changes, and moments of visible fear. She wrote everything down with dates and observations, stripping emotion out so the facts could stand on their own later. It felt cold, but she knew cold was sometimes the only way truth survived. Verna noticed the bikes before anyone said a word. They never parked close. They never lingered long. Just shapes at a distance, engines passing through neighborhoods they didn't belong in. Her smile stayed intact, but her eyes sharpened. Predators always noticed when they were being watched. That night, Junie arrived at school with a smile too bright, answers too smooth, Mrs. Too Smooth. Lynn recognized it instantly. The script. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." The smile of a child who had been coached. That was the first real sign that danger was escalating. Sparks took it hard. Watching from the edges while Junie suffered went against everything in him. He argued late into the night, pacing, voice tight, insisting they could grab the girl, get her out, disappear her from Verna's reach before it was too late. Graves shut it down without raising his voice. Hard, final. If they turned this into a street rescue, Verna would own the narrative before the sun came up. She would call the police. She would cry in front of cameras. She would tell the world dangerous bikers abducted her child. And the system would do what the system always did when fear and optics collided. It would hand Junie back while everyone congratulated themselves for restoring order. Protecting the child meant winning the war the right way. It meant making the truth undeniable, even to people who didn't want to see it. The tension inside the club rose, but the line held. Brotherhood wasn't about doing what felt good. It was about doing what worked. Switchblade found the hinge not long after. She didn't stumble on it by accident. She followed the trail backward, past Verna's current life, past her polished routines, into old files and quiet corners where stories went to die. The name Emery Carson surfaced like a ghost. A child. A death ruled an accident. Bruising notes that never quite fit the explanation. Healed injuries mentioned once, and then forgotten. Community praise for Verna, echoing even then, people saying what a good woman she was, how tragic it all was. Nothing proved, nothing stuck. Switchblade laid it out on the table, connecting the similarities with careful precision. Different child. Same methods. Same isolation. Same narrative control. Same outcome. The room went quiet as the shape of it became clear. This wasn't a single act of cruelty. It was a pattern that had survived because it knew how to hide. Graves felt something settle into place then, heavy and cold and certain. Verna's armor wasn't money or strength or even intelligence. It was repetition without exposure. She relied on each incident being treated as separate, unfortunate, unprovable. Exposing the pattern was the only way to break her. He looked at the faces around him, sparks, burning but holding. Switchblade, steady and sharp. A club built on roads and scars and lessons learned the hard way. He understood the cost of what he was choosing. This path would be slow. It would invite scrutiny. It would test their restraint again and again. But it was the only path that didn't end with Junie alone in a room, learning how to be quiet forever. Graves didn't make speeches. He made decisions. They would keep watching. They would keep documenting. They would let Verna feel eyes on her without ever giving her proof. They would turn whispers into statements, patterns into evidence, and belief into action that the system could not ignore. This was no longer about stopping one woman. It was about tearing down the shield that let monsters hide in plain sight. Verna Crowley didn't panic like normal people panicked. She counterattacked. The moment she sensed eyes on her routine, the moment she felt her perfect world shift even a fraction, she moved with the speed of someone who had practiced this before. Complaints appeared like weeds overnight. Quiet calls, anonymous tips, little reports filed in the right places. She painted Dane Hale as unstable, as distracted, as a father losing control of his home. And she laced the story with the right kind of fear, the kind that made officials stiffen before they even met the people involved. She suggested criminal bikers were stalking her family. Not outright. Never outright. Verna didn't throw accusations like punches. She placed them like seeds and let the system water them. She used careful language, worried language, victim language. A concerned mother. A frightened wife. A woman just trying to protect her child from dangerous influences. The call reached Detective Tomas Ruiz, and Ruiz did what procedure demanded. He didn't get to ignore a report because he suspected manipulation. His job was gravity. He contacted Dane, voice level, tone professional, explaining that an allegation required an investigation. The machine started moving slow, heavy, unstoppable once it rolled downhill. When Dane answered the phone, he was tired from work and already carrying guilt he refused to name. Ruiz's words hit him like cold water. In a single conversation, the neat illusion of his life cracked. He hadn't seen any stalking. He hadn't seen any danger. He hadn't seen anything because he wasn't there enough to see it. And now the system was asking questions that made him feel like he was standing trial inside his own skin. Verna's counterstrike had a second goal, and it was even uglier than the first. She didn't only want to scare Dane, she wanted to isolate him from anyone who might help him. If she could turn him against the bikers, against witnesses, against the people collecting truth, she could choke the case before it grew teeth. The neighborhood helped her without even realizing they were doing it. One of the women who had whispered concern weeks earlier, soft voice, nervous eyes, suddenly changed her tune. Switchblade tried to follow up, calmly, professionally, no pressure. The woman's posture was different now, guarded, rehearsed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Verna's a good mother. I never said anything like that." Switchblade recognized the fear behind the denial. Verna had cornered her somewhere quiet. A smile, a gentle voice, maybe a friendly warning dressed up as concern. People like Verna didn't need to threaten openly. They only needed to remind you that they had friends, that they had influence, that your life could become uncomfortable if you didn't keep your mouth shut. The wall of community protection repaired itself almost. Sparks took it the worst. The betrayal lit him up like gasoline. He was already carrying rage from watching Junie shrink, from watching Verna smile, from hearing people call her a saint while a kid suffered behind curtains. When he saw Verna at a public charity event, surrounded by applause and polite laughter, something inside him snapped. He stepped toward her, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, eyes burning. It wasn't a full explosion, but it was heading there fast. Verna turned, sensed the heat, and her lips curled into a small, satisfied smile that nobody else noticed. She wanted him loud. She wanted him ugly. She wanted him to become the monster in her story. Graves stopped him before he crossed the point of no return. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a warning shouted in public. Graves grabbed Sparks by the cut and hauled him back 2 steps, hard enough to make the younger biker stumble. Their eyes locked. Graves's voice dropped low, sharp, and final. "We win by staying clean." Sparks fought it for a second, breathing heavy, fists trembling like they had their own heartbeat. Graves didn't blink. Sparks backed down, not because the anger vanished, but because the Brotherhood code held. The club didn't save kids by feeding predators the narrative they needed. They saved kids by winning in places predators thought they owned. That night, Switchblade found Graves sitting alone, cigarette burning down to ash while he stared at nothing. She'd seen him steady through violence, through hard roads, through funerals. But tonight there was something haunted in him, something old. She asked him why he feared quick rescues so much, why he shut Sparks down with such force. Graves didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his words came out like confession. Years earlier, in another town, another case, he'd watched a child get pulled from a bad home by a well-meaning man who did it the wrong way. No paperwork. No documentation, just raw emotion and fists. The abuser called the police, spun the story, played the victim. The rescuer looked like the threat on paper. The system returned the child to the home until things could be sorted out. Things never got sorted out. The child didn't survive the next month. Graves said it plain, like a scar he refused to decorate. That was where his code hardened into one line that never bent. No child loses because the club couldn't control its anger. He'd rather swallow rage until it poisoned him than let it poison a kid's future. Meanwhile, Verna brought in her attorney, Grant Harlow, a man with clean suits and sharp words. Harlow didn't argue truth, he argued credibility. He started calling witnesses unreliable, labeling documentation fabricated, implying the bikers coached Junie and intimidated the neighborhood. He smiled while he did it, like he was simply protecting a worried mother from dangerous outsiders. It worked the way Verna intended. People who might have spoken hesitated. Teachers worried about backlash. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The system didn't move on gut feelings. It moved on what it could defend. And Verna was trying to make every piece of truth look like a smear campaign. Dane felt the pressure from every side. At home, Verna played the calm spouse, the reasonable partner, the woman burdened by everyone else's hysteria. At work, Dane stared at his phone like it might explode. In his chest, shame grew heavier each day. He wanted to believe his home was safe because the alternative meant admitting he had left his daughter alone with danger. He wanted to believe he hadn't failed because failure tasted like sickness. And then the ticking clock appeared. Dane packed his bag for another work trip. It was routine to him, the same grind that paid bills and kept the lights on. But now it had a new meaning. If he left again, Junie would be alone with Verna, an open season behind closed doors. Verna wouldn't just punish Junie for speaking up. She would punish her for being believed. Graves couldn't let that happen. He intercepted Dane at a gas station on the edge of town, not with threats, not with bravado, not with club swagger. He approached like a man offering a truth too heavy to carry alone. Dane's eyes narrowed at first, defensive, confused. Graves didn't argue. He didn't insult. He held out a packet. Inside was everything Switchblade had built: timelines, teacher logs, Nina's statement, requests for therapy documentation, and a single audio clip. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just Verna's voice caught in an unguarded moment, cold, sharp, and cruel in a way no saint should ever sound. Dane listened. His face changed in slow motion. Denial cracked. Something broke behind his eyes. When the recording ended, Dane stared at Graves like he was seeing his own life for the first time. Graves didn't press him. He only added one more detail, quiet but lethal: the lock. Dane had never questioned it before. A lock on Junie's door from the outside. He'd told himself it was safety, a precaution. Something responsible parents did. Graves said it plain. That ain't safety. That's captivity. Dane's hands shook as he put the packet back together. The world he'd built on trust and absence collapsed in his head. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He got in his truck and drove home like he was racing time itself. Graves followed at a distance, not to intimidate, but to be ready. Ready if Verna sensed the shift and snapped. Ready if Junie's life tipped from hidden harm into immediate danger. Ready to step in if the line between strategy and survival disappeared. The war had entered its most dangerous phase, because now Verna knew Dane was slipping from her control. And predators never let go without drawing blood. The house looked normal from the curb. Porch light on, curtains drawn. A welcome mat that had never welcomed anything honest. But inside, the air had the cold, tight feel of a storm trapped in a room. Dane walked in like a man carrying a weight too heavy for his bones. His bag was still in the truck. He hadn't gone to work. He hadn't called ahead. He had driven straight home with the packet of evidence sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. Junie was in the living room, half hidden behind the couch, clutching her rabbit so tight her knuckles went pale. Her eyes were wide, not with confusion, but with a fear that recognized danger before it arrived. Verna stepped out from the kitchen with a smile already built, already placed. She was in clean clothes, hair neat, face calm. She looked like the kind of woman neighbors trusted with spare keys. She took one look at Dane's expression and adjusted instantly, voice softening into concern. "You're home early," she said, like she was greeting him after a long day and not meeting him at the edge of a battlefield. "What's wrong?" Dane didn't raise his voice. That was the first sign she didn't like. He didn't explode. He didn't accuse wildly. He just looked at her the way a man looked at something he finally understood. "Where's Junie been sleeping?" he asked. Verna's smile twitched barely. "Dane, what is this?" "Are you upset about the lock again?" "It's for safety." "You know that." Dane stepped closer, still calm, still controlled, like he was trying not to shake apart. "Show me the key." For a second, Verna's eyes hardened and the mask slipped. The rage flashed quick like lightning behind clouds. then vanished as her face rearranged into wounded innocence. "You're scaring me," she said softly, glancing toward Junie like the child was the problem. "You've been acting strange lately. I've been worried. And now these bikers." "Don't," Dane cut in, still not loud. "Don't say their name like that." That stopped her for half a heartbeat. She had expected denial. She had expected him to defend her. She had expected him to be tired, to shrug, to leave again. What she saw in front of her was something else, a man whose blindness had finally burned off. Junie took a small step closer to him, rabbit pressed to her chest like a shield. Dane felt it, that tiny movement, and his face cracked for a moment. Grief. Rage. Rage. Shame. Then he swallowed it down and stayed steady. Verna shifted tactics. Tears rose right on cue. Her voice trembled perfectly. "Dane, you're being manipulated. This is what they do. They're criminals. They're poisoning you against your family." Dane reached into his jacket and pulled out the packet. He didn't throw it at her. He laid it on the table like a judge placing evidence on a bench. "I heard your voice," he said. Verna's tears paused. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "You recorded me?" "I heard you," Dane repeated, and now the steadiness in him sharpened into something dangerous. "And I saw the lock." Verna's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Her breath changed. She was running calculations now, not emotions. Predator math. Junie's rabbit slipped a little in her grip, and Verna's gaze snapped to it like it offended her. Then she looked back at Dane and tried to step past him toward Junie, her face sweet again, voice soothing. "Come here, honey," Verna said, reaching out. "Your daddy's confused. Let's not make this worse." Junie didn't move. Her feet stayed planted behind Dane like they belonged there. Verna's fingers flexed, and the softness in her voice turned sharp at the edges. "Junie, now." Dane stepped in front of his daughter fully, blocking Verna's reach. His body made a decision his words hadn't yet spoken. "No," he said. The word landed heavy, simple, final. Verna stared at him, the mask cracking at the seams. She took a step forward anyway, as if she could push through him by force of will. That was when the front door opened again. Graves entered without drama, not barging, not posturing. He carried a calm that felt like gravity. He wasn't alone. Mara Chen stood behind him, and her presence was all business, all law, all sharp edges wrapped in professionalism. A phone in her hand was already recording, not to threaten, but to document. Verna froze. Her eyes flicked over Graves' cut, his stance, the way he filled space without trying. She understood immediately what this was, not a fight. A trap. A clean one. "You brought them here," she whispered to Dane, venom under the words. "After everything I've done for you." Graves didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stepped into the doorway between Verna and Junie, silent and immovable. A wall made of restraint, a witness made of steel. His stillness made one thing clear. If Verna put hands on that child now, it would be seen, recorded, and turned into the very proof she'd always managed to dodge. For a moment, Verna tried to hold the mask. She straightened, smoothed her hair, forced a smile. "This is outrageous," she said, voice quivering with practiced indignation. "You people can't just come into my home. You're intimidating my family." Mara Chen spoke then, calm as a blade. "Emergency custody petition is already filed. Evidence is attached. And we're documenting this interaction for the safety of the child." That was when Verna broke. Her smile vanished. The saint disappeared. Rage poured out of her like something uncaged. She screamed at Dane, at Junie, at Mara, at Graves, calling Junie a liar, calling Dane weak, calling the bikers criminals. She lunged forward, trying to shove past Graves, trying to grab Junie the way she always had, fast, controlling, certain. Graves didn't strike her. He didn't shove her hard. He simply held the line, hands up, blocking, keeping her from reaching the child without giving her bruises she could later twist into a story. His restraint became a weapon sharper than any fist. "Don't touch her," Dane said, and his voice finally broke, not into weakness, into truth. "You don't touch her ever again." Verna's eyes flashed. "You believe her?" she spat, pointing at Junie. "You believe that little Junie stepped forward then from behind her father, rabbit pressed to her chest. Her voice shook, but it didn't disappear. It came out clearer than it ever had, because the room had witnesses now, and Verna couldn't erase witnesses with smiles. She locked me in, Junie said, at night, when you were gone. Dane's face crumpled, his knees looked like they might give. But he stayed standing. She said I didn't deserve food, Junie continued, words tumbling out like stones finally rolling downhill. She said I was bad. She said if I told anyone, nobody would believe me. And she said my mom died because of me. The room went silent except for Verna's breathing, quick and angry. Dane made a sound like pain tearing through him. Tears came, but they didn't weaken him. They burned something clean inside him. He knelt in front of Junie, hands shaking, and for the first time in too long, he looked at her like she was real, like her fear was real, like her pain was real. I'm here, he said, voice raw. I'm not leaving you again. Verna laughed, harsh and ugly, as if love was a joke. You think you can win? The system will believe me. I know how this works. Mara Chen didn't flinch. She didn't argue with Verna's confidence. She answered with paper and pattern. In court, Verna showed up curated and polished, dressed modestly, eyes red like she'd cried all night. She played the victim role flawlessly, accusing Dane of abuse, accusing the club of coaching Junie, implying intimidation and fabrication. Grant Harlow spoke smoothly, painting the bikers as unreliable, the witnesses as confused, the documentation as manufactured. Mara Chen stood and let him talk himself tired. Then she placed the pattern on the table where it couldn't be ignored. Emery Carson. An old accident. A child's death filed clean, while bruises and inconsistencies sat in forgotten notes. The same community praise. The same saint narrative. The same isolation tactics. The same script Junie had just described, matching details nobody had fed her, details that lived in records from years earlier. The courtroom shifted. A judge who had heard 100 messy custody battles suddenly heard something different. Repetition. Strategy. A playbook. Verna's eyes widened for the first time, not with fear of being disliked, but with fear of being seen. When the judge issued temporary custody to Dane and ordered no contact, Verna's mask shattered completely. She screamed, standing up, shouting threats and curses, demanding Junie be returned to her. Bailiffs moved in. People stared. Cameras captured it. The saint became the monster in public, and once that happened, she lost the one thing she relied on more than anything else. Credibility. Dane walked out of that courtroom a different man. Not absent by work. Present by choice. A father who finally understood that love without presence could become a weapon in someone else's hands. Junie walked out, hunted no longer. Not because fear vanished, but because she had been heard, and the hearing had weight. Graves walked out with the same calm he entered with, but something in him eased. The club's code had held. They hadn't won by intimidation. They had won by endurance. And Verna walked out screaming, dragged by the arms, because the world had finally stopped believing her smile. The system arrived the way it always did, late and careful, carrying forms and practiced concern. CPS showed up because Verna had made sure they would, firing her last retaliation shot on the way down. She accused Dane of abuse, of manipulation, of being controlled by dangerous outsiders. On paper, it looked serious enough to demand attention. Patty Given stepped into the house without drama. She didn't rush. She didn't soften the truth or sharpen it. She watched. She listened. Junie told her story the same way she had told it before, steady in its details even when her voice trembled. The fear in her body matched the words, and more importantly, Patty noticed what changed when Verna was gone. Junie's shoulders lowered, her breathing slowed. The house felt different. Healing had already begun, and healing didn't lie. The accusation collapsed under its own weight. Detective Ruiz followed procedure to the end, closing the loop with a professionalism that carried quiet respect. He never apologized. He didn't need to. Truth had held, and in his line of work, that was the closest thing to justice most people ever saw. Junie's nights changed first. Dane let her choose the room, let her choose the light, let her choose the lock. She slept behind a door she could secure from the inside, and she checked it twice before climbing into bed. Sometimes 3 times. Trauma didn't vanish because a judge said so. It loosened slowly, like a knot worked free one careful pull at a time. Dane's life shifted in ways that didn't look heroic from the outside. He quit the travel-heavy work that had kept food on the table and distance in his home. He took a local job that paid less and demanded more of his time where it mattered. Less money, more presence. That was his penance and his promise. He learned how to sit in silence with his daughter, how to listen without fixing, how to stay. At school, Ms. Lin Chen carried relief and grief in equal measure. Relief that she had been right to trust her instincts. Grief that she hadn't been able to act sooner. She changed how she taught after that. Quiet kids no longer slipped past her notice. She logged patterns. She asked better questions. She trusted the way fear hid. Dr. Mendoza continued therapy with the same steady precision he always brought. He documented Junie's recovery, not as a miracle, but as a process. He reinforced the truth again and again until it stuck. What happened was real, and none of it was her fault. He treated healing like a skill that could be learned, practiced, and strengthened. Switchblade spent long nights tying the evidence into a trail so clean it could survive any courtroom glare. Statements, timelines, cross-reference notes. She closed gaps predators usually slipped through. What she built couldn't be dismissed as coincidence or hysteria. It was a map of harm laid out so clearly that denial had nowhere to hide. Sparks changed in quieter ways. The fire in him didn't go out, but it learned discipline. He understood now how easily rage could turn into a weapon for the wrong side. He learned that saving someone sometimes meant standing still when every instinct screamed to move. That lesson stayed with him, heavy but earned. Graves carried the deepest shift of all. He didn't talk about it. He didn't mark it with ceremony. But the old weight in him eased. The memory that had shaped his code, the child he hadn't been able to save years ago, loosened its grip. This time, the system didn't send a kid back to die quietly. This time, restraint had beaten cruelty at its own game. This time, the kid lived. As Verna's credibility cracked, the past caught up with her. Old cases reopened. Names resurfaced. People who had been scared found courage in numbers and spoke. The myth of the neighborhood saint collapsed, replaced by a harder lesson no one wanted to learn. Evil didn't always look wild. Sometimes it wore perfume and volunteered and smiled for photos. Graves didn't stay to watch it all burn. He never did. At dawn the club rode out, engines low, shadows stretching long across the road. He didn't need applause or thanks. What he left behind mattered more. A father who stayed. A child who slept behind her own lock. A teacher who listened closer. A therapist who documented truth. A network of adults who now knew what to watch for and how to act when something felt wrong. Graves rode on with the brotherhood, unchanged on the outside, altered where it counted. The road swallowed the sound of their engines, but the line they drew remained quiet, steady, and strong enough to keep another child from standing alone. The truth settled in after the noise faded, heavy and unavoidable. Appearances had lied. The warmest smile in the room had hidden the cruelest hands, and the people who wanted the world to feel safe had helped keep the danger comfortable. Evil had not announced itself with rage or chaos. It had whispered, volunteered, and smiled, until nobody wanted to question it. A child's fear had been the real evidence all along, not bruises alone, not paperwork alone, but the way fear lived in flinches, in silence, in a body that stayed small to survive. The shrinking posture, the rehearsed answers, the way a child learned to disappear before anyone could tell them they were lying. Brotherhood revealed itself where reputation meant nothing. It was not a patch, a title, or a look that scared people out of the way. It was what you did when someone small asked for help, and the world encouraged you to mind your own business. It was choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Graves and his crew proved that strength did not need volume. Real strength sometimes looked like restraint, taking the harder path so the victim did not lose later in a courtroom or in the court of public opinion. It meant patience sharp enough to cut through lies. Redemption did not come from saving themselves. It came from saving someone else the way they wished someone had saved them once. Compassion was not softness. Compassion was courage under control. And the truth carved in steel was simple. When a child spoke up, the right kind of men did not ask if it was their business. They made it their responsibility. Junie didn't make it through because she was strong all by herself. She made it through because somebody finally believed her and stayed when leaving would have been easier. That's the part people forget. Monsters don't always look like monsters, and silence is often the disguise that keeps them safe the longest. If this story hit you in the chest, tap like so, more people can see it. Subscribe for more outlaw justice stories from the road. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done if that kid had walked up to you? Because some roads lead nowhere. But some roads lead to the moment you become somebody's rescue.